Hey guys, welcome to the newest episode of the SaaS Sessions podcast. I'm Sunil, I'm your host for today, and today we have an amazing guest on the show, Patrick Thompson from Seattle. He's the second guest from Seattle on the show, guys. So yeah, so he's a product designer and former design manager at the fourth biggest SaaS company in the world, which is Atlassian, and he's currently the co-founder of Iteratively. So, hey Patrick, welcome on the show, and let's get to know more about you, your journey, and iteratively and what all you do.
Sunil, thanks for having me. Definitely excited to be on SaaS Sessions.
Mhm. Awesome, great. So, I want to know more about iteratively, and I know that it has a lot to do with data. But before that, let's talk about you and your journey. So, you were the design manager at fourth biggest SaaS company in the world. So, how was that experience?
Yeah, it was amazing. Atlassian's a great place to work. I've learned a ton while working there. I originally started out on the growth team at Atlassian. I was there in San Francisco office for about 2 years, and then transitioned over to become a design manager on Jira Software in Sydney. So I actually had
Mm-hmm.
the opportunity to relocate to Australia, and yeah, that was just an incredible life experience, and got to live in a different country and travel the world a bit. And yeah, I had a great time. Got to work with a bunch of really talented folks as well. And yeah, definitely grew a ton both professionally and personally.
Wait, and so what product did you work on in Atlassian, or it was all the products?
So when on the growth team, I was primarily focusing on activation, so running
Uh-huh.
high velocity experiments on top of funnel, and
Uh-huh.
then virality in products. So trying to get
Uh-huh.
folks to invite others into their instance, as well
Mhm.
as sharing content. So making it
Uh-huh.
really easy to share content like Confluence pages or Jira tickets or boards within Jira as well.
Uh-huh.
And then when I transitioned over to Jira software as a design manager,
Uh-huh.
I was primarily focusing on a new product initiative that they're doing called Next Gen Experience. And that was really rethinking entire product experience behind how Jira software was configured and how it was used by end customers as well. So the best way to sort of equate to it is like, how do you make Jira software a little bit more Trello-y? Like, how do you simplify the workflow configuration and
Uh-huh.
management of these types of projects? And yeah, that was a great experience.
And so how did you get to, I'm really curious, like, you said you started as a growth guy, like, the growth team, and then you were a design manager. So how did that transition
Mhm.
happen?
Yeah. So actually, my first job out of college, my background professionally is in design, but my background academically was in business. So my both my undergrad and masters are in business,
Uh-huh.
and I got really into marketing and started out doing a lot of conversion rate optimization and SEO and SEM out of college.
Mhm.
And that eventually transitioned me over into more of the user experience aspect behind how user psychology and how users use products, and that
Right.
got me more into design, and eventually joined Atlassian as a growth designer. And that's
Nice.
pretty much where my passion is how do you optimize product experiences, and how do you get folks to experience the aha moment. So everything
Uh-huh.
from onboarding to in-product engagement and retention campaigns,
Right.
um, and a lot of high-velocity A/B testing. And as part of that, obviously, data comes in quite often. So when you're doing
Right.
experimentation, and you're doing cohort analysis, all these types of experiences are derived from good, high-quality data. So I had a lot
Right.
of experience doing analysis and working with some great data analysts and data scientists in other companies. And so
Mhm.
that's what kind of got me into data.
Right. So let's talk about that in a bit. But before that, I have a great question. So you had a great job, just like you said, right? From what you just said or how you described your life at Atlassian, I think it was very great. And to be working in the fourth biggest SaaS in the world, and obviously great products, and plus a great role, plus a very dynamic role, right? And you do what you like to do. So why quit a great job and start your own?
My wife asks me this question all the time.
Yeah.
I'd say, like, for me, like, I always wanted to do a startup. I
Uh-huh.
was very entrepreneurial in college and tried to get into more doing marketing consulting with small businesses. And I was always really interested in eventually doing a company. Unfortunately, I got into a lot of debt in college from student loan debt, in the hundreds
Mhm.
of thousands of dollars.
Oh,
And
yeah.
So that kind of helped, that kind of put a pause on it, going and doing that after college. And actually really am thankful for that, because I was able to work with some really good companies and learn a ton out of college before being able to do that. But obviously, now that I'm a little bit more mature in my career, I was able to pay off all my student loans. I had a bit of a nest egg saved up. So financially, the timing was really well positioned for me to go take the risk. And it was a conversation that my wife and I both had around, hey, now or never, kind of,
Mm-hmm.
because we want to have a family at some point as well. And then, yeah, like I mentioned, Atlassian is an amazing company to work for. I feel like
Yeah.
Mike and Scott, the two CEOs, have built an amazing place that is super welcoming and friendly, and folks feel are very well taken care of. And I was growing both professionally as well as personally there. As I mentioned, I got really into yoga and got really into photography, and was a
Mm-hmm.
really well-rounded person. But like
That's
there was always something missing.
that's
And
really
I feel
great.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, there was always something missing. Like I had this drive to go start something from scratch. Actually, before I moved to Sydney, they had this initiative called Greenhouse, which was going to be a startup incubator inside of Atlassian.
Mm-hmm.
And I originally signed up to go do that when I was moving to Sydney, but unfortunately, that project got postponed. So then I ended up transitioning over to Jira Software as a design manager. But I was always really interested in trying to take a product or project from 0 to 1. Like, how do
Right.
you create the initial experience? How do you figure out and validate that there's something there, and then actually go get customers to use it and get feedback and iterate? I was always really focusing on growth and optimization post product market fit.
Mm-hmm.
I really wanted an experience where I could actually try to work with a team of folks and actually go from 0 to 1. And yeah, so that was the primary driver, is just wanting to go create something from nothing. And then I had the opportunity to work with an amazing co-founder as well, Andre, who
Right.
I worked with previously at his company called Simplicity prior to joining Atlassian.
Uh-huh.
He's an amazing engineer, an amazing friend, and the opportunity came up to work with him, and the timing was perfect. And yeah, like if I don't think I would have left Atlassian if
Yeah.
he wasn't the one that I was going to go do this with.
Totally. I mean, yeah, when you have a great job at a very great company and everything is going well, you kind of go into the comfort zone, right? And
Yeah.
that leaving that is like really hard. But it's great that you did, and you chase the dream or the kind of goal that you really had, right? From the beginning of your career, that you always wanted to run something of your own, build from something from 0 to 1. That's really great. So yeah, let's talk about iteratively.
Yeah, so Iteratively is a platform to help teams collaborate on their analytics data. So primarily customer telemetry or product analytics. So to give you a little bit of background on sort of how we decided to work on this, it actually probably is best to start from the beginning. So
Uh-huh.
when Andre and I decided that we wanted to work together, we didn't really have an idea of what we wanted to work on. We had a group of folks who we wanted to solve problems for, which was
Mm-hmm.
other software teams.
Right.
We had a few hypotheses from my time at Atlassian,
Mm-hmm.
but pretty much none of those panned out. But we spent the first 6 months of 2019 doing customer discovery, customer development.
Mm-hmm.
So we would just go out to different teams and talk to product managers and data analysts and growth folks and marketers and customer success people, really just trying to understand the pain points that they had with getting their job done.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, for 6 months we didn't do any development. All we did was have conversations with folks and try to open up our ears to listen to the problems they had. And the number one problem that we heard was, there's three problems in particular that we heard.
Uh-huh.
One was, and one of them we ended up building the company around. The primary problem that we heard was around customers not trusting their data that they're
Uh-huh.
capturing in order to make business decisions with this data, in order to hook it up to marketing automation, to do any personalization or experimentation with this type of data.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about data here, it's typically customer telemetry data, so time series data. So what
Mm-hmm.
are customers doing in your product? How are you analyzing that behavior in order to improve your product experience or deliver a better service? And when we really tried to uncover why companies were struggling with this, because they had tools like Amplitude or Mixpanel or
Right.
Segment, there's a lot of tools in the space for data visualization already, or trying to make use of this data. There's a lot of marketing automation tools for sending messages like Braze or Autopilot or Vero. And
Mm-hmm.
there's tools for customer success teams to help prevent churn like Vitally or MadKudu. So there's a lot of tools out there in the SaaS space. But what we kept on seeing is that there's a lot of human error involved between
Uh-huh.
the data consumers, folks who need to make use of this data, and data producers, folks who are actually responsible for doing the instrumentation, typically engineers,
Mm-hmm.
who are writing explicit code-based analytics in the product. And there's just a lot of human error. You have, your iOS team sending an event called user signed in, and then your Android team sending an event called user logged in.
Mm-hmm.
And the data consumer is left to either do, join within SQL or try to munge this data together in a form that makes sense for the business. And there's no
Yeah.
real good QA process around how companies manage this data today. It's really kind of an afterthought for a lot of
Uh,
organizations. We hear that term quite a bit. And so when we thought about how we could help, we looked at what a lot of organizations were trying to do internally, and they were creating spreadsheets or Confluence pages or Notion pages trying to manage this type of data and
mm-hmm.
create sort of documentation, but inevitably that documentation would become out of date. It was always a very painful process to have these conversations with these teams who were struggling. And so we
Mm-hmm.
thought there has to be a better way. And we ended up building a solution that really helps bring the entire company together on what's important to their business, which is data, and help them define what are the metrics that they care about, what are the events needed to answer those metrics, what are the properties or attributes on those events that you want to capture, and really
Uh-huh.
define it in a structured way with a workflow to help make it a very collaborative experience. And then what we do with all of that, with that entire schema that you've built in our application, that entire
Mm-hmm.
spec, is we actually generate code for your developers and integrate into their software development process to make their
Uh-huh.
lives 10 times easier to actually add instrumentation and to guarantee that the data that you're actually capturing is correct.
Totally. So that's like you had like a lot of research done around the exact problems to have come up with such a niche solution, right? And for such a big problem that people might be overlooking every day at the jobs. So this kind of makes me curious about why data tracking is important for product managers.
Yeah, no, great question. Yeah, it is definitely like that 80/20 rule that comes into place with data. And so I'd say like 80% of most companies' data is probably fine, right? Like it's good. But there's that 20% extra mile and like getting things perfect, which is really where I think a tool like Iteratively comes in and helps. And the way that I best describe this is that data, 10 years ago, teams weren't really running high velocity experimentation unless you were, much bigger company. Teams weren't using data for email personalization or landing page personalization. You weren't doing personalized advertising based off customer behavior within your product. And now all these things are coming into the forefront. There's a lot of
Right,
use cases where customer success teams, marketing teams, sales teams even are all using this type of data to better serve their customers.
right,
And that's definitely a new, a wave or a new trend that we're seeing. And what we imagine is that 10 years from now, even it's going to be much more important than what it is even today. And what we see is the
mhm,
best companies today, like the Atlassians, the Drifts, are all using this type of data to really create amazing product experiences and improve their level of service for their customers.
right,
And the best teams, the teams who use this data will ultimately win within the market. And when you see like, okay, well, I have good enough data to answer a behavioral question, that might be fine. But when you're hooking this data up to marketing automation platform, good enough doesn't necessarily work in that context, because
right.
you'll end up sending the wrong email, or you'll end up entering the wrong user into a segment for an in product experience, or you'll make the wrong business decision
Uh-huh.
ultimately, and that could cost your organization millions of dollars. And this is where I feel like some governance around this type of data really helps ensure
Totally,
that quality and helps ensure the decision making of how you're actually using this data for.
totally, right. And how do you identify exactly, this bad data, which is like this 15-20%? So how do you guys do it at iteratively?
Yeah, no, good question. I'd say there's two types of folks. There's folks who are aware that there's bad data within the organization, and there's folks who have their head buried in the sand and don't yet know that they have bad data.
Yeah.
And the reality of the situation is that every organization to some extent has bad data. And when we think about the type of data that we're really helping companies with, it's around customer telemetry, clickstream data, product analytics. And this data is relatively visible within the organization. We're not necessarily talking about your Salesforce data, your CRM data. When we talk about customer telemetry data, it's very, very easy to think of it as an afterthought for most organizations.
Mhm.
And it's very, very easy to, it's kind of a chicken and the egg problem. So if companies are getting not getting value from this data, they're not investing potentially in making sure that it's high quality. Companies who are getting value out of this data or who have worked at organizations previously where they got a ton of value out of this type of data
Mm-hmm.
definitely see the value and then they invest in it.
Right.
And when we talk to product managers who are trying to identify whether or not they have a quality problem or don't have a quality problem, the best way that we tell them is like, we guarantee you that you do have issues today. And our best recommendation for folks to do is go just do a data audit. So go
Right.
spend a week to go catalog all of the events that you have that are being tracked in your tools, catalog how this data is actually being used by your CSM team or your sales team. Try to figure out, create a data map around what you're actually capturing, where it's being captured from, how it's being used. And that really helps give you some insight into the importance of this data within your organization.
Mhm.
And what we really typically see is that there's a lot of lip service played to this type of data as well. So a lot of folks are, yes, we're data driven or we're data informed.
Uh-huh.
But then you ask them, like, hey, when was the last time you actually used this type of data, or how are you using this type of data within your organization?
Mm-hmm.
And it's typically crickets. you'll
Mm-hmm.
you'll
Mm-hmm.
they'll be like, oh yeah, like I look at an amplitude report like once every couple of weeks, and you're like, oh well, is that enough? Like, how do is that enough for your organization? Do you think you're using data to its full effectiveness? And
Right.
in some cases they're like, oh, if you're a small startup, you're making a lot of decisions based off gut and intuition, or if you're a sales driven organization, you're making decisions based off of RFPs and customer advisory boards. But if you're sort of a product led growth organization with, you're trying to cut down acquisition cost and increase product retention,
Mm-hmm.
you live and breathe like this is like gold for your organization. Like, this type of data is the
Right.
lifeblood of how you're going to be optimizing your product experience, how you're going to be acquiring your customers, how you're going to be better servicing those customers. And it really just depends on the type of business. And you'd be surprised that even a lot of the blue chip businesses who have SaaS products are trying to become more product led growth. They're trying to
Totally.
reduce their
Yeah.
customer acquisition costs. And I
Yeah.
think you're probably pretty familiar with this at Whatfix as well, but it's definitely a huge trend that we see within the market.
Yeah, totally. So I think there's a product-led growth is like, this keyword is catching up a lot. So I've hosted Wes Bush, who runs Product-led Institute on the show before.
Mm.
I've hosted Kieran Flanagan, who's the VP of marketing at HubSpot. So he talks a lot on product-led growth. And there's a lot of product-led, alliance, product-led summit, online events that are happening as well around the same topic. So it's definitely hot topic for product managers and product marketers. So I think from whatever you said just now, so that kind of defines, or it helps kind of identify between a good product manager, or a good product and a product manager, and a great product and a product manager, right? So great product and product manager would really worry about how to make that 15-20% of data which is bad, how to fix that, right? So does this data which is like really bad and solving it and cleaning it, so does it really affect the product manager's job or their responsibilities in any way?
Yeah, I would say when we think about how the typical workflow for data today within most organizations is, you as a product manager might be working on a few features, you're trying to solve a few customer pain points, and you're working within your agile squad or your software team to really ship software. And typically, a lot of that decision making into what you should be prioritizing is informed based off your qualitative data, so customer research, customer feedback, your quantitative data, like usage metrics, feature adoption metrics, and things like experiments. And when you're shipping new features, a lot of the times we hear that data is sort of an afterthought. But in reality, it needs to be sort of embedded into the software development lifecycle. So similar to how developers write test cases for software code, PMs should
Mhm.
be thinking about what are the metrics that they should be moving when they're actually shipping a feature, doing a product enhancement. What does success look like for that? So what is the baseline of that metric today? What is the target for when we're actually shipping this, like 30 days down the line? What should it be? And if we can get product managers and software teams in general to think about the outcomes that they're trying to drive versus the output of what they're doing,
Mhm.
we'll ultimately be building better software as an industry. The other thing that we see quite often when we talk about like how PMs transition from very much output to outcome driven, it's how do you adopt that within the organization? So typically, the organization is a reflection of the values as a whole, and
Uh-huh.
primarily the values of the leadership team within that organization. So if you're working for a company
Mhm.
where the leadership team doesn't necessarily value data-driven decision making, or they don't necessarily understand the nuances of things like product-led growth or experimentation or feature discovery and adoption and all these types of things that are very valuable for what we do within software,
Uh-huh.
then it's going to be an uphill battle to try to become more data driven. When we see companies where the leadership team really buys into this, they want folks looking at reports, they want folks making data informed decisions,
Mhm.
they expect PMs to not necessarily talk about shipping as the definition of done, but what was the impact on the organization for shipping that feature? How did they measure success or the learnings
Right.
behind that? Then I feel like those are much healthier conversations and much
Right.
more empowered PMs, because then PMs are usually given a metric to actually go move, and
Mhm.
they're empowered to go actually do that. Versus
Mhm.
if you're a PM in an organization that doesn't value that, then it's going to be an uphill battle regardless of your own personal inclination to go use data.
Totally. And I know that there's a lot of, again, it all comes from the leadership, right? As you said. So if leadership team sees value or, if they have the buy-in only, then the PMs can really go and start this process of, identifying bad data and trying to go behind and fix it, because the leadership team would always care about the impact, right? They would always see the bigger picture. They don't want to get into the nitty-gritties of it generally. So how do you get the stakeholders involved, make them see value in all this if they are not seeing value currently? So
Yeah, no,
what's in it for them? Like,
yeah, great question. Yeah, great question. I think that's the best way to sort of approach this. When you think about transitioning or transforming your organization from potentially using a little bit of data to now using more data to for a variety of use cases, the best way to do it in my mind is to start small and have proof points. It's
right.
the easiest way is to show wins. So when you talk about the level of investment to transition organization, typically what we see a lot of smaller companies do is they end up hiring a head of data, or they
Mm.
hire sort of um, a VP of product or a director of product analytics. And
Right.
these roles, their entire responsibilities around adoption and creating self-service decisions within these organizations, or enabling folks to use data. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a really big investment for an organization who may or may not have been sort of high growth, high velocity, where they're growing really quickly,
Right.
to see the value. And so the best way that we tell companies to do is, hey, just start small, start instrumenting your product, start using this data for, it could just be for marketing automation. So typically there's two things that we think of here. One is revenue driving. So how do you use data to drive more additional revenue? And I think marketing automation or sales automation are probably the two biggest ways that you can convince a VP of sales or convince a VP of customer success to get behind and help to actually fund the initiative. The other
Mm-hmm.
thing is obviously VP of product for business decisions. So how do you know that what you're shipping is actually moving the needle? How do you measure feature engagement, cohort retention, all these different types of metrics that are the lifeblood of SaaS? That's super important. But a lot of folks still today think that their intuition or that their gut is the best way to make decisions, and that data is only it's only an input into that. But a lot of folks lean more heavily on their gut than probably on data, in my mind, than what they should. It really
Uh-huh.
just depends on the organization. And I would say, yeah, so start small, find a use case, instrument that use case, show proof points, and then expand from there. And then
Okay.
if you do that enough times, eventually you can help your organization sort of with that transformation.
Right. I think these are the best practices to keep data quality high. But do you have probably three or four
Mhm.
best practices that the listeners can take
Yeah.
away?
Yeah, so I talked about obviously doing the data audit earlier. So it's definitely
Uh,
best practice as far as understanding the landscape of data coverage that
mm-hmm.
you have within your product today.
Mm-hmm.
The other, starting small and expanding out. The last one that I really recommend is having a full-time owner. So we talked about having most companies hiring a VP of data or a head of data or a head of analytics. That's a big investment to make. You don't have to hire that person, as if you're a product manager who's really passionate about this, take ownership. Like, put your hand up within your organization and say, hey, I will own the tracking plan. I will make sure that we have best practices in place for quality assurance, and help teach folks within the organization how to use this data so that we can derive more value from it. And I feel like this is a great space in the sense that, like, it's still a very new space. Like, these tools obviously
Right.
were, a lot of these tools didn't exist 10 years ago. So for a PM, a young PM especially, or someone who's really trying to grow their career, I feel like taking ownership of these types of projects within an organization is a great way to sort of grow your career.
Totally. And again, so for this PM, right, as an action point after listening to this episode, what I just want to give them an action points, right? So if any PMs are listening, so what questions they could go and they could start answering about their to check their data quality about this data audit, which is like the first step. So maybe you can share the questions you asked in your interview process when you were researching up.
Yeah, so typically our interviews for customer discovery were very open-ended. So we actually followed a process. I mean, a lot of folks probably are familiar with Steve Blank, but we have an advisor for a company called Justin Wilcox who created this process called the Focus Framework, which is very open-ended interviews. So it's, hey, what is your role within your company? What does success look like for you within your role? What are the problems that you're struggling with in order to achieve that success? Can you give me an example of the last time you tried to solve that problem? How big of a problem is that for you? So it was a very structured process, but non-biased process as far as the interviews and customer discovery that we went through. And definitely highly recommend that if anybody is thinking about doing a startup, this is the best way to make sure that you're not scratching your own itch, but you're actually solving real problems for real people. And obviously that you're validating the problem before you think about the solution. A lot of folks are solution-led. Don't be solution-led. But when we think about the questions that we ask customers now specifically around to suss out whether or not they have data quality issues, a lot of the companies that come to us already have an understanding that they have a data quality issue. So most of the customers who come from us are either from existing channels that we hang out in, so a lot of Slack communities, or they're searching for a solution to the problem, and then they find us on Google. So and obviously referrals, so word of mouth is the best way for us that we've been growing. So we don't typically ask a lot of, what we consider like sales questions when we're talking to these companies. They already identified that they're a good fit for our product.
Right.
When I think of companies it's really easy for me to disqualify a company by asking, when was the last time you used data? And if you ask, or when was the last time and like how do you view data? Like, how do you view the impact of data within your organization? And if folks are like, hey, data is the lifeblood of our organization, this is how we operate. Or if folks have a growth team, that's a really good indicator of our product being a good fit for them, because most growth teams obviously care a lot about data quality. It's the only way to really do high velocity experimentation is to trust the data and the results that you're actually capturing. Because I mean, this happened to us quite a bit, even at Atlassian, where we run an experiment, and then you run it for 6 weeks, you'd get the results, you'd post experiment, you'd analyze the results of that experiment, and you find out that you weren't capturing all the information that you need, or there's a data bug, or there was a bug in the way that you did your cohorting, and that means that's 6 weeks of wasted results, and that's 6 weeks of missed learning opportunity for the organization. And this happened to us a few times. So it was enough that we actually had to invest in fixing it internally. And so when you think of the questions that, I typically ask companies, it's really, I'm looking for indicators that they care about data. When you think about building a company, like what we're looking for right now is the early adopters, not even like, and, I'd rather work with a company who understands the value of data, sees the value in the product initially, and then we'll, obviously go to early majority, then late majority, and so on as we expand the product. But right now, we're really looking for early adopters who just understand the value of data and capturing quality data for their organization.
Totally. That's a great takeaway for a lot of PMs who are listening to this episode. So I have 3 rapid fire questions or lightning questions for you. So maybe you can just answer what's on top of your mind. Yeah. So So what do you know about your work now that you wish you would have known when you first started?
Yeah, great question. I mean, there's obviously we can talk a little bit about Iteratively and we can just talk about startups in general. I feel like with startups in general, I feel one of the things that was super valuable for me, not knowing it going into this full time, was just the ability of having a good support network. So I found founders and other CEOs and folks who have done startups before to be super supportive and just generally great sources of insight and help,
Mm-hmm.
where I just didn't realize, that was when you're not a founder and you're not doing a startup, like you don't realize how strong of a community that is.
Mm-hmm.
And I recommend anybody who's thinking about doing a startup is to try to ingrain themselves within that community. It could be locally within your geography, or it could just be online. I talked to a lot of other co-founders all over the globe now at this point, and I found that
Right.
extremely helpful. Just have that support network, because you go through a lot of things that most folks just don't ever have to consider going through. And yeah, it's great to have those resources to lean on.
That's
And
great.
then
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, and the other thing about doing a startup is it's a ton of work. So figure out how to manage your energy, not your time. So like obviously you can pour a ton of time into something and not get the results that you want. So similar to being data driven, it's like how do you actually figure out what's the best use of your time? Focus less on the busy work. Figure out ways that you can actually scale your impacts and manage your energy in the sense where it's like, hey, if you're feeling great today, work extra hard. If you're not feeling great, give yourself the permission to take a day off and recover and recoup, so that you can come prepared the next day to actually hit the ground hard.
Right. That's really great. What did your biggest professional failure teach you?
Biggest professional failure. So early on, as I mentioned, I started out doing conversion rate optimization at a company called Skinit in San Diego. And I remember pushing an experiment on Friday at like probably 5:30 p.m. And you're not supposed to really push code. Most folks in software know don't push code
Oh,
on the weekends, going into the weekends.
yeah.
And I pushed an experiment
Mhm.
because at the time our VP of marketing was like, "Oh no, it's fine. Just feel free to push it. Like you're good to go." So I pushed it,
Uh-huh.
and I ended up breaking the cart all weekend. So we lost like 70K in revenue that weekend.
Oh, damn.
And I mean, that was like in 2 days. And found out about it on Monday morning when I got back into work. Because I mean, we just didn't have any good processes. And I was very much more of a cowboy coder
Mhm.
at the time. And yeah, like it was just around the notion of communication and collaboration. So, I mean, I got the green light from my boss. So I was like, hey, let's do it. And I didn't have the foresight to be like, I should probably like let the team know that I'm doing this, and should probably communicate to the engineers just to make sure we get like one quality pass through this before I push it live. And yeah, just general lack of foresight into the impact of that led to a pretty big financial. And I think I was like 21 at the time, so like 70K was quite a lot of money. So
Mhm.
even now, I mean, we've now run experiments where we've that I've been a part of that have contributed to millions of dollars in revenue gains, which is a lot
Yeah.
more than 70K. But as a young kid, I definitely remember that having a pretty big scare and like, hey, am I going to lose my job for this? I didn't lose my job, but the ability to know to communicate and collaborate with others and be able to make sure everyone's on the same page around what you're doing and why you're doing it,
Yeah.
and have the foresight to know like, hey, it doesn't matter if we ship it on Friday. It's
Right.
probably better to have this tested and ship it on Monday and
Yeah.
not take the risk.
Yeah. I think that learning came to you at a very high cost. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so what's the number one thing that has helped you shorten your skills learning curve?
I mean, for me, it's I I read a lot less than I used to, but I do a lot more than I used to as well. So I tend to jump head on into something. So if I don't know how to do something, I just jump in and try to do it. I used to read a ton, and so I grew a ton from reading. I'm a really quick reader, so I tend to find that like I'll read for about 5-10 minutes. If there's something that I'm trying to do for the first time, I'll read about it for 5-10 minutes, and I'll just jump in and try to get it done. And
Hmm.
that ability to not be like, I don't know how to do it, I'm not going to do it. The ability to be like, okay, great, like I'm sure I can learn this.
Hmm.
I feel it's like biggest life lesson where it's like, even if something is scary or I've not done it before, I'm willing to try to get it done.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I feel like that's been the most impactful, at least now that I'm in a startup, is I don't have to worry about asking for permission. I don't have to worry about whether or not I'm going to do it right. It's better to try and fail than to not try at all. And
Yeah.
I feel like when you're in a startup, you're doing 1,000 things, or there's 1,000 things that are trying to grab for your attention. So having the ability to jump in and try to learn something on the fly, even if you make mistakes, is completely a game changer, at least in my mind. Like I wasn't always
Yeah.
like that. So, and I think the notion of doing a startup really dictates and requires that you have those skills. And I
Yeah.
feel like the best way to learn those skills is to go do a startup. So go try
Yeah.
it. Like you'll have to do 1,000 things that you're uncomfortable doing, you've never done before.
Yeah, totally. That's really great advice, Patrick. So thanks a lot. Those were amazing insights. So thanks a lot, Patrick, for coming. Taking this time for recording this episode. And
Thanks for having me. Definitely excited and appreciate the conversation.